You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
A mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
I have today a good friend from the UK. Mark Sutherland is going to be our guest today. And Mark is going to be talking about Brexit. He's going to be talking about Trump. He's going to be talking about progressives, and he's going to be talking about globalism. And these are all subjects that are very, very important to Mark. They're very important to us who live in America and people who have been living in this false progressive socialist paradigm. It's about time that we wake up, and Mark's here to tell us why. And Mark, welcome to the Connecting the Dots show. It's great seeing you again, my friend.
There you go.
There we go.
Hi, Dan. I do apologize about that. Hi.
Hi.
Fantastic to be with you. Sorry, I was going for the wrong mute button. Now I found the right mute button, but it's lovely to join you again, my friend. Thank you very much indeed. All the way from London. It's just after 9 o'clock tonight.
Well, we're always glad, and that's a great thing about the internet and about doing podcasts like this. We can actually see you and not just hear you. And so we've got a great opportunity. I know you've sent us a number of videos and things that we're going to supplement the program with. But I really want to start this with a discussion we had over the phone the other night, and that is Brexit is coming up. Literally within days. And I want to make sure that our listeners hear a little bit more about how Brexit happened. You see it very much as a phenomenon that's very similar to the Trump revolution.
Yeah.
The fact that people are getting tired of socialism. They're getting tired of communism. They're getting tired of people telling them what to do. And I think that your perspective as a Brit is excellent. I think we need to hear what you folks are thinking.
That's very, very kind of you to say, Dan. So in June 2016, we had a referendum. The then Prime Minister David Cameron had promised, in regard to the fact that when he was elected, even though he had tried to forego that, so he had then had a victory, I think 2015. And he had given a promise in the fact that he would offer a referendum to the British people to decide whether they wanted to stay in the European Union. As you and I have discussed in the past, and as our wonderful friends like people like William F. Jasper and people like Alex Newman, with all of their written books and written articles, you are fully aware that when we joined, we were taken in to the common market in 1973, and we'll come back to that in a minute. We joined with 6 other countries where we could trade across. We could have low tariff barriers to trade. And we were taken in as a country in 1973. We were not told. There was no referendum then. The then Prime Minister, Ted Heath, and we need a program on him. He then said, if I win the election, 72, I believe he won that, then it meant that he would take us in. And we were then taken in to the common market. But there'd always been a plan. And whether we have time tonight, because we can go all over the place in regard to the history of the EU, and with your radio show is not called Connecting the Dots for no reason. It is called Connecting the Dots because we all bring various dots, various bits of the jigsaw to the party. And what we're then discovering is that there's more and more and more jigsaw pieces to add and add and add once we start doing our investigation. So coming right up to date. So on June, I think the 23rd, 17,410,752 people, with a majority of over 1 million in the UK, voted to leave the European Union. The European Union had morphed from the common market to the European Union. When it was designed, and we can argue 1923 by Jean Monnet and Arthur Salter, it was always about monetary and political union. And here's the big one that you are fully aware of. It was always planned to be a leg of global governance. That's the whole point. One of these steps, huge steps on the way to create a one world government, a new world order. And as Senior Bush says in 1992, Kyoto and all that, we have an opportunity to create a new world order. I won't do the accent because I always get it wrong. But those infamous words that he said are all part of that. So we voted out with a majority of over 1 million. To the elites, to the globalists, they were stunned. To David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, was stunned. Now, leading up to this, people like Nigel Farage has spent a good 30 years banging a drum to get us out of the European Union. It became a common market, the European common market, and then again it became this European Union. It was never explained to the people what it was actually about. And as you know, Dan, any country that is not in charge of its own laws, not in charge of its own money supply, not in charge of its own borders, and not in charge of its own language is frankly not a country anymore. So our parallels are profoundly strong with what's happened in regard to the election of President Trump. And we would have to go back to the formation of the Federal Reserve. We would have to go back to the formation, to Woodrow Wilson's comments, socialist. We would have to go back to the attack on your constitution and why it has taken so long to get, on one level, to get to this point where the American people have massively woken up, and under 8 years of Obama, that really did that, to where we are now. So coming back to our own situation, is that it was a referendum that was voted on. A vast majority of members of Parliament in Westminster, and many people would have seen BBC Parliament and all the rest, they voted to hand the vote over to the people. They thought that the people were not going to vote to leave. They thought they had it in the bag. And there was Project Fear 1, there's been Project Fear 2, Project Fear 3, and Project Fear 4. Now, a number of people listening to this may be thinking, well, hold on a minute, Mark, you voted to leave in June 2016. Article 50, which is in the Lisbon Agreement, is a piece of legislation that meant that a country could put in Article 50 and have 2 years negotiation in which to leave. March last year, we were supposed to have left on March, I believe the 29th. It then got pushed back to April the 12th. And then, believe it or not, the big joke it then got pushed back to Halloween, October the 31st. And people listening may be going, well, why did it get pushed back, Mark? What went on? Well, what happened was, and here's the parallels between us and your great nation. The parallels are this. is that when we voted to leave, there was no doubt about it, it spurred on the Trump campaign. We remember all the conversations where Steve Bannon was saying to then the Donald, right, we need to do this, we need to do that, you know, go to Pennsylvania, go and talk to the coal miners, go and travel here and be specific, and you will win this. And he was spurred on by the fact that people in my country had decided to take control of their nation back, even though we have been vilified. For various people that have voted to leave have been called racist, bigots, ill-informed, didn't know what they were doing. Well, they did exactly know what they were doing, and they're not racist and they're not bigots. And we are entitled to... We are a democracy. You are a representative republic with an electoral college for a reason, and an electoral college that needs defending. And the reason why you at the moment have got a bunch of Democrats, or demon rats, as I call them, and a bunch of communists fighting to get rid of your electoral college and fighting to actually make sure that you have open borders, is that is the only reason why they feel that they would actually win an election, because they have no policies whatsoever. The reason why I say this are deliberate, and hopefully certain parallels may unfold if I don't lose any train of thought. So where are we at? We have spent the last 3.5 years as a people at war with our own government. As we know, politics is supposed to be an area where we can have discourse without reverting to weapons and then having a war or having a punch up on the village green, you know, with various guns that we have access to. And we have then discovered, as the Donald would say, I'm going to drain the swamp. Now, whether that's happening as fast as we would like is another massive subject for another day. But the swamp has been revealed, and the swamp are globalists. The swamp are people that go to Davos. The swamp are people that go to the Bilderberg meeting. This is not, we are not making any of this up. These are people that are members of the Trilateral Commission, the Council of Foreign Relations, etc., etc. I'm not educating you, particularly, Dan, on anything you don't know, because we talk about all those issues. Now, with the Bilderberg, of course, being established, I think, in 1954, the whole issue of then bringing about like the Club of Rome by 1957, and then bringing the unification of French and German armament factory making and coal and steel, and that meant that was then the formation of what the EU is now. Now, jumping to now. So we have spent 3.5 years at war with our own government. We elected, it was a democratic decision. Those people that voted out won. And the parliament has done whatever they could to stop this. Okay. We then had court cases under people like Gina Miller. And it has to be said, there's a little character in the background that has an unbelievable amount of power that nearly bankrupted the Bank of England in 1992 when we got kicked out of the European exchange rate mechanism. And that man is George Soros. And he exists and he is real, no matter what Channel 4 over here say and accuse anyone of having a go at George Soros and saying you're being anti-Semitic. No, we're not. If you look at the 60-minute interview that he did, declaring the fact that one of the most amazing times of his life was when he was going around with his uncle, foster uncle, and helping Nazis and his uncle take materials, etc., off poor Jewish people that were off to the extermination camps. This is real. That interview can be found. Mm-hmm. Now, where are we at? We leave on the 31st of January after the fact that we have had court cases, we have had this campaign, that campaign, we have had a total and utter media, Dan, that is left wing. And in some ways, we need to talk about the BBC. It would be very, very interesting to touch on that because of the parallels of what is going on. The reason why you and I have these I'm privileged to have this incredible conversation with you, is because, again, of the ties, the fact that we are fighting this global attack. It is a global attack. It's across the world. And climate change is a thing that we need to discuss at this point, at some point. So where are we at without losing track? December, the Theresa May, or as I call her, Theresanus May, had actually allowed, she had handed over. I mean, it's shocking to say, really. And you know what's going on in Washington. If we look back in history, where I believe that in 1984, there was a meeting that Teddy Kennedy had with Brezhnev at Russia, asking the Russians to interfere with the American election. There's an interesting article I read about that the other day. So nothing's been new. The fact that must be in the second term in regard to Reagan and going into those elections. The fact that we've had all this. So our civil service here, it won't be a surprise to you. You know this. It's all the Obama carryovers. All the people that say we have to fight a revolution. We have to fight the system. We have to fight the Trump campaign, the administration. Our civil service is weaponized. Our civil service has not been running this country since 1973 because the European Union, as it is now, became the European Economic Community, became the European Union, I believe, as it is now in 1993. It slowly morphed into all of this. So, our swamp. So when civil servants like Ollie Robbins who was actually just being knighted, which I just cannot believe, who was appointed by Theresa May to negotiate on behalf of the EU how we should actually leave the EU. Now, yes, I'm being a bit cynical there, majorly cynical there, but that is how it turned out. And this particular individual, I believe, when he was at university, he was writing essays bestowing the delights of Stalin. Now, doesn't this ring a few bells for you when you've got Brennan voting for the social democratic communist whatever when he was young, when you've got people like Comey when he was a lot younger, when he was at maybe university or studying and bordering on voting, if not voting for socialists, etc. Doesn't this sound all familiar of what all these people were actually playing at? Then of course we had the classic in Hillary Rodham Clinton, I'm going to write my PhD on Saul Alinsky. I mean, we're not making any of this up. So we have our own swamp like that. But I think we have been in many ways worse, I think, sir, in covering this up. And what's happened, having voted, there was a stalemate in Parliament. A stalemate for 805 days of a parliament that obstigated, that would not push through the fact that the people had voted. We need to get on with it. The fact that we'd had 2 extensions, if not 3 extensions, and we leave, let's just clarify this. We leave on the 31st of January. And how have we reached this immediate point? Theresa May, because of the complete and utter debacle of the fact that in 2017 she called an election which she only just won. She lost seats, and some of us even feel, you wonder whether she was actually trying to throw it away, because I then began to come to a conclusion that she is not a conservative in the way that you guys, we would truly understand across the pond. And I would actually call her a socialist in a blue coat. And with some of the comments, the progressive comments and collective comments that she'd actually come out with. And that is part of the reason why you then saw people like Nigel Farage leave the Tories, but constantly go on about leaving the European Union, because in many ways he is on the one hand, he is a libertarian. I may not agree with certain things he says, but he is a libertarian. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, also a conservative. And the reason why David Cameron allowed that referendum to go forward, much to the dismay of all the Remainers, is that he wanted to lance that boil of the the group of people in his own party, under people like the Bruges Group, etc., to actually say, no, we need to be a united party. Now, this is the important bit of history, and you and I have discussed that woman I think before, which is Margaret Thatcher. And in 1988, she made a very famous speech at Bruges where she went, no, 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 Mr. Delors. And what had happened, and Margaret Thatcher is like the antithesis of someone's journey in 1973, voting and supporting the then Ted Heath to actually take us into the EU, thinking the EU is a wonderful thing, that by 1984-5, really beginning to go, no, this is appalling. This is dreadful. The European Union is appalling. And the reason why she had come to that conclusion, even though she had signed, various treaties and stuff like that, is that she was sitting at the meetings and observed that this is a train wreck. And she actually described in one of her autobiographies that the European Union will be seen as one of the biggest follies ever. So she then fought it. The Conservative Party, and we can argue this, actually conspired to get rid of her. And one of the reasons why, and it's all unfolding in this sense, because we start to see it. And that's why, history is written by the victors, Mr. President. History is repeated if we do not go back to history and understand what's going on. So then we had a prime minister after that called John Major, who we all thought, nice working class lad and all the rest. But actually, as he's turned out, to be one big Europhile. Then we've had his Conservatives, supposedly. We then have Tony Blair, a Labour or New Labour, fighting, actually gain the centre ground. Tony Blair, when he stood for his seat in Sedgley, and that's a very, very important seat right now, Sedgley, with the recent election that has just happened, and I'll go into that in a minute, is that Tony Blair actually stood on a campaign, I think in 1983, saying, well, I'm going to reform the EU and we need to do this, that and the other. Well, he soon changed his mind on that, because in 1997, when he became prime minister, and I admit, I for one then fell for that. It's a bit like how everyone fell for Bill Clinton on one sense, plays the saxophone and everyone thinks, oh, isn't that fantastic? But forgetting that maybe he didn't actually officially win New Hampshire and how that was actually fiddled. And there he is. And then we remember the interview of Hillary Clinton going, I stand by my man and all this. Propaganda. Tony Blair was seen as the UK's equivalent of Bill Clinton. Blair, a total and utter Europhile. Dan, a total Europhile. So jumping ahead, I've even said this on a number of occasions. When you have in Westminster, you have a number of parties in Westminster. So you have the Conservative Party, you have the Labour Party, you have the Liberal Party. You then have the Welsh Nats, the Scots Nats. You then have very Sinn Féin MPs that have been voted for but haven't taken their seats. You then have Irish Conservatives sitting in there as well. When a number of these parties, except the Irish, Sinn Féin would be supporting Remain, I'm sure. Because the European Union has to be remembered that it is a socialist construct, and I'll come to that in a sec. That when all these parties within Parliament are turning around saying, well, we really don't think it's a good idea to leave, we all must vote to remain, I then wonder on a personal level whether I'm living in a one-party state, if not a communist country. Because even though they're supposed to have different colours for their different parties, Dan, they are all saying the same thing. And people began even more to smell a rat. And there is no doubt about it whatsoever. People knew exactly what they were voting for. If they had to have walked 500 miles to get to the voting booth, the night before, they would have done that. They would have actually done it. Mm-hmm. So after all this fight that's gone on, Theresa May stepped down. There was a election for a new leader. And as you're fully aware of how that worked out, came down to two people, came down to Jeremy Hunt, and it came down to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, who I believe was actually born in America. Now, it's interesting. Boris Johnson, you could argue in many ways, he won the election. Of course, he's now our prime minister. He, in 2016, had a bus. He was going up and down, and he played a principal role in getting us to leave the EU. He was part of the BREXIT movement. Front and center politically. He was vilified. He was really attacked. And what it revealed within the Conservative Party, and people have said this, and a dear friend of mine have said it, that the Conservative, it's a very, very broad party. It goes basically from what you and I would term as the right to the left, to a very liberal, progressive thinking under this one umbrella. And Brexit has revealed all that. It revealed our swamp by Donald Trump winning and becoming president of the United States. It revealed that swamp, and then it's slowly over time, it's revealed our swamp in the fact that people did not want to leave the EU who are our political masters. The fact that on your side of the pond, within 19 minutes, it could be argued maybe 9, on his inauguration, the demon rats were talking about impeachment. Mm-hmm. The
Mark,
parallels.
No, I don't want to cut you off, but I have to tell you, this is fantastic because you and I talk about this a lot. Mm. The world right now is a communist swamp.
Yes.
And the people who are promoting this stuff, there's the difference between a socialist and a communist is basically a communist is a socialist in a hurry. Okay.
Yes.
And the bottom line is communist China and Russia, who falsely has been said the Soviet Union fell. It never really fell. It just went underground. You take a look at the countries of the world today, and what's happening is this gigantic movement to world communist technocracy. Where everything is controlled by a technocratic, we can call it also, for that matter, we can call it Nazism, because the fact is corporations are part of this mess too.
Yes, absolutely.
And but the bottom line is what you're talking about is that the whole world now is facing a common enemy, and that is the Marxists who believe in a technocratic, cradle-to-grave, total control state. And that's where we're at. Okay, that's all I want.
No. I mean, you're absolutely right. And you raise, as you always do, you raise a number of important issues. Can you just, if I forget, can we come back to the whole definition of Nazi? Can we just come back to that in a second? So bring him right up to date. So Boris Johnson has become the Conservative leader. He is immediately Prime Minister of this country. He then asked for, because of the fact that things were being blocked going through Parliament in regard to getting us out, in regard to the legislation, etc., he then tried to push through an election. And what's happened by law, we have a law where you can only you have a five-year term Parliament, and the opposition have to agree if you put forward the fact that we have to have an election, or they pass a no confidence motion. Well, the Labour Party leader Corbyn would not pass that because he just knew that they wouldn't win. They knew that they wouldn't win, and they didn't win. So on December the 12th, we had an election. By midnight, a exit poll had been produced predicting the fact that the Conservatives would get 386 seats, the Labour Party would get 209 seats. I think it worked out in the end that the Tories got 385, Labour got 209, and then other parties got that. And it gave Boris Johnson a majority of 80, a working majority of 80. Wasn't as big as Margaret Thatcher's. However, here's the key thing. The Labour Party lost lost many seats that they have held on to, one since 1935 in the northern part of our country. In other words, what would they call a red wall, a bastion of Labour Party support? And that they also lost the famous seat of Sedgley. These people that had voted Labour all their life went out in droves to vote Conservative. And the reason why they went out in droves to vote Conservative is because the Labour Party were not representing the working man anymore. They were representing what we call the Islington bubble and people with money. Champagne socialists is who you and I would absolutely call these people that are working for these corporations and this technocracy that you actually touch on. So that is what blew up in the Labour Party's face. That's given Boris Johnson. A few days ago, he signed the legislation for us to actually leave the EU. And can I make an interesting note? Someone said, was that announced on the BBC 6 o'clock news? No. Did it suddenly appear on the 10 o'clock news? I can't actually say whether it did. Maybe it did. But that particular organisation, the British Broadcasting Corporation, which I have to pay for via a tax, because anyone that has a television license and wants to watch a television in this country has to pay £150 for that privilege, and it's a tax, and it's bias. It is bias. So just quickly touching on, and here's the link, like with CNN, the bias, ABC, MSNBC, all behind Clinton or whoever, whatever adjectives that we want to call them. If we go back to an incident, I think 1971, maybe 1972, there was a presenter on a very well-known BBC radio program on Radio 4 called Jack D'Manio. Jack D'Manio was a Eurosceptic. Jack was a critique of Europe. He knew the fact that they were Ted Heath coming up to take us in. There was a phone call made from Ted Heath to the head of BBC Radio, I think a guy called Trethorne. It was his mate. And basically he was asked to either do something about this or remove him. There's a book called The BBC, The Noble Liar. It reminds us of this infamous incident. So this organization has form. These left have form. Within the BBC and within, say, like Channel 4 or other mainstream news, what's happening is that a lot of the youngsters and then are educated in various universities doing whatever media degree or English, and it's a left-wing bias, and then they go to The Guardian to apply for the jobs to actually work for these organizations. That's a timeline of truth. So it's a certain thinking and propaganda, and it touches on the fact that, as you quite rightly say, we are fighting this global battle, and it is a global battle. So going back to the fact that you mentioned Nazi, we talk about the means of production. What's fascinating to me, so Nazi, that's really interesting when we're called that, National Socialist Workers' Party. The clue is in the second word, and the clue is this. So in regard to communism, the means of production seemed obvious in the fact that the government are owning everything, including the human beings that live within their walls. In regard to Nazism, they then turn around and say, no, they have to be right-wing because corporations were, running Germany. They have to be right-wing. It's private business. What they don't realize is that those corporations, those people running those corporations were members of the Nazi Party. And here's a very, very infamous piece of history. So there's a very, very particularly good book, Hell's Cartel. Hell's Cartel lays out by Darman Jeffries, and there's other books. And it's history that I've started really looking at over the last few months in earnest, because he lays out the cartel IG Fairbairn, where a number of German companies came together, Host, Agfa, Mayer, etc. People have to remember that for these German companies and others, that many Jewish people, slaves, were taken in to go and work for these companies. So this cartel formed around about 1924-25 was the industrial power base to supporting this little man with a moustache that actually shouted a lot and said that he wanted to take over and invade the world. And the cartel of the pharmaceutical chemistry industries and those companies thought, well, if he takes over the world, then we could have the market of the world for our goods and for the stuff that we are making. And this book lays out, like others, that I.G. Fairbairn had factories inside Auschwitz. There comments on the fact that, Mengele, how were all these experiments actually financed, and taking all that history, all that information that they'd actually learned. Now, as a Bible-believing Christian, and I don't hide that at all, the fact that the Nazis were into the occult and were into disgusting practices and all the rest. There was this conversation about, I believe someone like Himmler either having a massive occult library where there is up to 6,000 books, as someone had once informed me. This is just disgusting. So this is history. This is what has gone on. So we are now fighting the fact, and it's very interesting when you touch on about the Soviet Union falling, and we look at someone like Gorbachev. Gorbachev has been in the background pushing globalism. He's been pushing that via environmentalism and all this thing. There he is. Everyone thinks that this particular man who seems so wonderful within Russia, etc., he had actually disappeared when we see these incredible films of him going all over Russia, connecting with people and all the rest. And then he is the person that signed away the Soviet Union. And then it's morphing. With certain characters, it's morphing into something else. And I have said this, and other people have said it greater than me first. So from a spiritual point of view, and we do believe, as the Bible says, Ephesians 6, we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. This is a spiritual battle. And it really is. And we have to engage, and we have to engage in prayer. I make no apology for that whatsoever. That when the wall came down in 1989, it came to the West. This whole ethos came to the West. You have seen that senator in Vermont, Mr. Bernie Sanders. I go to Moscow for my honeymoon and all this kind of thing, and bestowing the delights of communism. You've seen an embeddedness of this thought for a long period of time. You could either say back to the McCarthy era. He was right. We then started to see so much of this over here. And as you were quite rightly saying, is corporations. Now, if I may, can I have a slight little segue into my recent film that I have made that I'm going to get out, right? Because the film that I recently produced, which is called The Iris Echo, which is a 22-minute drama. We've just sent out the trailer to you, sent out the end credits where we use the Hungarian uprising of 1956, which is very, very powerful, which is real, when the Hungarian people rose up against the Russians. So the Iris Echo as a trailer, a little trailer, is a warning about communism, Dan. Other people may not, the other people that I made it with may not see it necessarily in that particular way, but over time, definitely very, very quickly they will. And I hope to get that 22-minute drama out. It's on my editor and one of the directors' website at the moment, and I'd hope to get that out soon, because I think it's a very, very important warning of what could go on. I mean, you've just had one of the people who's working behind the scenes for the Bernie Sanders campaign, who's just disappeared. Project Veritas go in with a camera, and then they catch this gentleman going, well, if President Trump wins, then we're going to start burning cities and burning Milwaukee. And then what we need to do is to set up gulags. I mean, absolutely. If you watch what he said, and I immediately thought of the ironic, well, it's not ironic, I mean, it's just I found it quite incredible, really. An hour and a half before watching that footage, Dan, I ordered Alexander Solzhenitsyn's book, Gulag Archipelago, and I always get this.
Archipelago.
Archipelagos. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I ordered that book an hour and a half before. I've been always meaning to try and get hold of that book, and I believe that in 1972 he actually spoke to your Congress and warned Congress of what is going on. And there you've got that young man going, "Oh, we want to create gulags." We've seen since the election of President Trump, young people taking the communist flag on to the streets of America. We then got, Antifa and all the rest. Antifa also in Europe. Antifa are over here saying, "Oh, it's anti-fascist." Well, they don't even know the meaning of the word. They don't know the meaning of the word. They don't know their history.
Well, actually, and Mark, if you look at the flag for Antifa, it is a communist group from 1936 that was fighting against the Nazis, against the National Socialists, that were openly saying, we're not National Socialists, we're international socialists, which is the definition of communism.
Communists, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mark?
Yeah.
This is Thumper. I have the trailer up on the screen. If you'd like us to show the trailer to your movie there, I can do that at any moment here.
Thumper, that's really, really kind. Good evening, sir. Nice to see you.
Good evening.
I would be delighted if you would. That'd be fantastic.
And Thumper, I didn't really get into this. I got into it in my announcement of the program, but Mark is an extremely accomplished filmmaker, producer, and has done a number of award-winning films. And I want to make sure that we mention that before we show the trailer for this film.
Well, I've been putting some stuff out there in the chat about who Mark is and about your production company that you have, and that you're the founder. And let's ready to show them the trailer to the movie here.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Thank you very much indeed.
And I've been putting the link to this trailer out there in the chat, so those of you that want to watch it later again or something, you can find that link. I've been putting it out on the chat for y'all. Here we go.
Thank you.
Good morning, New Slavosky. The glorious leader wishes to extend his warmest congratulations to those workers who have risen at the required time to fuel the fires of our industry that will soon crush the decadent and despicable imperialists to the south who seek to destroy our mighty nation. We have a caller on the line from the Middlelands. Caller, how do you wish to express your gratitude to the accomplished leader?
How long are you going to lie to people? The streets are littered with whole families dead, murdered! God's leader is
We
a
apologise for that outburst.
He's a coward!
Perhaps the music will enlighten you.
No. Hello, comrade.
Are we in trouble?
I have to report to the ministry. You stay there, make sure these tapes are played throughout the night.
I've got the receiver if you can hear this.
Who are you? How do you get access to government property?
If you help us, we can help you start the beginning of the end for the leader.
Hello? Who are you?
They're going to be listening to us 24/7 from now on.
Iris, I'm scared. The January snow may leave the land barren, but come February, the daffodils will spring.
What the fuck are you doing? You're fucking mad!
I know. I know you're not real.
Wow, that's a powerful trailer.
Yeah, Mark, I have to thank you too. I've seen the full film, and I have to thank you for that. But what an amazing thing that you're trying to do, and that is make people aware just exactly how dangerous communism has always been, and it's not gone away. I mean, it is now stronger than it ever was. And if you don't believe that, take a look at all the countries in the world who are now living under communism that weren't 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely. Thumper, thank you for your, and Dan, thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate that. I wish that making 22 minutes of film is a lot easier than it is at times, especially when you're trying to do it on a budget of zero. But it's very interesting because other people, crew-wise, would not necessarily hold the views to my politics. But
Mark, we have a question out in chat. Is it out already, or is it coming out?
That's very kind of you. It's coming out. I've got to release it. I've got to get it out of the hands of the editor and director of that. It's got to be released. That's why we've released the trailer. And as you've got I tell you what, it'd be amazing if you've got access. I think I sent you the link to the end titles of the 1956 Hungarian uprising. In many ways, that would be amazing to show now, because as Dan said, the warning, because this is history. That stock, I use stock footage, which we had a rights to, and it's real. So that is history. This is what these people suffered through.
Yeah, let me get that set up, and I'll have it ready for you here in just a moment.
That is great. And Dan, you're absolutely right. What's happened is that that people haven't cottoned on to the fact of the Frankfurt School and everything, and the invasion of our education system. And on both sides of the pond, I mean, we've got our mutual friend Alex Newman telling people to get their kids out of the school system. I've got friends over here that homeschool their children, and homeschooling over here seems to be growing. You've always had a huge movement of that. These are the end titles of the film. The soundtrack was recorded by a 24-piece choir, which I'm very, very proud of. And this is using stock footage from the Hungarian uprising in 1956 with our visual effects and adaptation on there. And I'll be delighted, Thumper, if you could play that now.
Here we go. Nice.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, not at all. Thank you for showing that. I'm not just saying this just for the sake of it, but I'm always honored when you're able to show your work. It's a bit like when, you know, people write articles and they write books and they send it to you. Is always a real privilege. It's always a privilege to show stuff that you've created. That took me and my dear editor and director friend there, Tristram, a heck of a long time, far too long in some ways. It was it appeared in 4 film festivals in America, under the sort of wire. It's been in a few. But I was just saying, it's interesting because crew-wise, they wouldn't necessarily hold my politics. Now, I'm rather interested in why suddenly that film is now coming out in 2020, where we would have loved to have got that out quite a while ago. And then, of course, in 2015, and this is, Dan, you've seen it. I'm not saying that we could show it for 10 minutes. I'm not saying that necessarily we do, but, or even put it in the chat, Thumper would be great. But in 2015, I made a short film called Between Lambs and Lions, which depicted a time when the American Constitution had been suspended and there was complete overreach by the executive branch. And it took the Old Testament story, it took the book of Daniel and set it amongst the political machinations of Washington politics. So you had President Nebuchadnezzar, played by a black actor, so you can draw whatever conclusion you want to, and you're absolutely right. So I then was privileged to make that, and that was made in the UK, and that was my contribution, a small contribution to try and wake people up to what was happening in your nation at that time, and my own personal believing that everyone needed to vote for Donald Trump. What's quite interesting, a little sort of vignette about that, story about that, is that I loaded that film up onto Vimeo. A few weeks before he announced the fact that he was running for the presidency, and we all remember when he came down Trump Tower and he came down the escalator there with Melania. And it didn't occur to me that at one point it was like, oh my goodness, just the power of how God leads you to do things, and then get that going. So I would be delighted if that could be put in the chat, Thumper, because it's on YouTube. It's only got over 16,000 hits. I wish it was more. But I also know, and we may touch on something else in a minute, I also know that I believe it has been suppressed, and, you know, it's not suggested in various algorithms and stuff like this. And that the privilege of coming on shows like this and having this discussion, this is real, and being able to share your work. And that touches on another communist thing, which is this whole thing of propaganda, this whole thing of suppression. Facebook, there has been suppressing people, kicking people off. If it's going to take down Diamond and Silk, then my goodness me, there's no help for the rest of us, you know, and everything else. And all these other people that they have been playing with. I've had 2 Facebook page accounts taken down personally because of stuff that I put out there.
You must be some kind of a radical. My goodness. Goodness gracious, Mark.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? I wouldn't necessarily.
It's a badge of honor around here.
It is a badge of honor, and I am very. It's interesting because people say to me, well, Mark, you know, why do you talk about American politics? I get an unbelievable amount of criticism for that. Why are you going on about American politics? What about our politics over here? Because as Dan and you and I were touching on, this is a global battle. I'm privileged to have a lot of friends across the pond on your side of the world. And because it is understanding why your nation came about and the fact that people left Europe because of religious persecution, Puritans coming over. That is why, and it's understanding that. Now, what is very interesting, and here's the other parallel to bring immediately. And so in the 1700s, there were 2 revolutions, even though some people would start to argue over this. But there were 2 revolutions, one with God, one without God. So the American War of Independence and the the French Revolution.
French Revolution.
Yeah. So the American War of Independence. The reason, and the reason why I'm saying this is rather important, because one of the regiment that the British feared the most were what were called the black and white robed regiment, which was the preachers in the churches, talking about the fact, what King George was doing and all that, and preaching and encouraging the Americans to fight for independence. Now we have an interesting discussion how many people did that. Was it 3%? Was it 7%? Was it 3% backed up by 4% in regard to logistics and all that? It's quite an amazing thing to me looking at history. Now, this particular book, Green Tyranny by Rupert Darwell, right? This fascinating. Have you read this then, Dan? You're aware of this?
I have, yeah.
Well, what I find interesting is how the fact that Rupert raises that the piece of paper, the 1700s piece of paper, stands in the way of the global tyranny of progressive left-wing takeover. That your constitution stands in the way of that. So my understanding is that the Constitution was written in September 1787 and that the French Revolution was in May 1789. So one nation under God, even though we would say that not all the founding fathers were Christians, maybe some of them were atheists, deists, and whatever. But that's the fundamental root, the Judeo-Christian heritage. And I want to come on to something in regard to that, where it reflects on Europe, trying to join the two. Now we look at what happened in the French Revolution in 1789, where at one point, Madame Guillotine was going around France, when it got totally out of control, executing many, many people. And of course, it then becomes the land of Voltaire and all the rest, and it becomes the land without God, creating this atheistic, humanistic construct. Why do I say that? I say that because we fought the Battle of Trafalgar, we fought in the Battle of Waterloo against Napoleon, we fought against that thinking. Napoleon, emperor, taking over. We then were a separate, independent nation, and we gave that up in 1973. We come back to that. So we then brought in to Europe, we brought into a construct that was started by 1956, started well before that, in regard to the way it thinks, and is then, even though it's where the Reformation happened and all the rest, and on all the rest of that. Not that history is then talked about in regard to the Lisbon Agreement, and the Lisbon Agreement is the equivalent of the European Constitution. But you're not having comments about God. You're not having comments about history. And just to remind everyone, the European Union is a socialist construct. Its 26, 27 commissioners that run it are unelectable. The actual European Parliament in many ways is a joke, because the MPs can't push forward legislation. They just have to discuss what they are told, what is coming down the line. That's why it's about the fact that we have all these European laws. We have all this red tape. There was like a gap between 1973 and 1986. And suddenly in 1986, it all came tearing down. But this is the key thing. It goes back to, you were talking about this, the fact that we are fighting this global fight, and that America's constitution, what America represents of exceptionalism, the light upon the hill, even though Obama and Hillary Rodham Clinton, they don't believe in this exceptionalism whatsoever. Hillary Clinton believed in running the biggest mafia organization going, called the Clinton Foundation, and taking money off many, many countries around the world. This should be a clue to people of what is actually going on. And I don't have to talk to you about this because you are an absolute expert on Agenda 21, Agenda 30, etc., with what they're trying to do in various states of America, particularly in Montana, etc., where you're trying to turn it just into an animal sanctuary, and where you shut down 26,000 miles of roads and stuff like this. And then you wonder why there's fires and you can't get fire trucks up them, you can't get access to things, and you're not doing proper backburns and all the rest. And then we quickly jump to what's been happening in Australia, and we have 187 people arrested just before Christmas and beyond in regard to arson. That 85% of those fires are arson. But it's this whole thing of climate change. I don't have to lecture you over this. You know this. That's why you go to the meetings and all the rest. Climate change, of course, you know, when people say, oh, oil was going to run out in 10 years, ice caps are going to make, the ozone's going to do this, this is going to happen. And all it did was increase taxation. It's taken money and money away. And of course, the Paris Accord was all about that, which was to strip your money away and to spread it around. So again, that is communism. Am I saying the climate doesn't change? Of course it does. God's in charge. If he wants to tilt the earth slightly towards the sun, then he'll do it. Then it's on that particular axis, and when it's spinning. And during medieval times, it was rather warmer over here than at times it is now, and there's various grapes being grown all over the place. We only have to look at Greenland. Why was it called Greenland? Because I'm presuming because it was green and you could walk across it. I mean, you know, these are all these kind of issues. And then we have, you know, Greta Thunderbird, as I call her, poor young girl. I think the parents, personally, I'm going to say this, who should be actually locked up for child abuse. And there she is, Greta Inc., which is a very, very good program to watch. Ezra Levant has done from Rebel Media with the wonderful Keenan over there trying to interview her in Sweden. This whole setup. And then, you know, we've got Prince Charles meeting her. Prince Charles, you know, Lawrence van der Post follower. Prince Charles believing in, you know, climate change, and we've got to do more. Well, I wonder how much of your money you're going to give away, son. I mean, you know, I could go on, but it indicates to me this whole globalist agenda, because you're more than aware of that book Silent Spring in 1962. You're more than aware of that was released on your side of the pond, and this whole agenda.
Mark, I have to tell you, you brought up the royal family, Prince Charles, but I hope our listeners realize that Philip was the guy that started the World Wildlife Fund. He's actually been the guy that's been promoting it. And one of his famous quotes is, "We do not believe in private property." No. And he's a hardcore Marxist. He came from Greece. He was a hardcore Marxist as a youth, and he's never changed. He's great friends with Fidel Castro. He's great friends with all these communists, and yet he's part of your royal family.
Well, yes, and two of them have just left, as you are fully aware of, and have gone to the post-nation nation called Canada, run by that complete and utter joke, Justin Trudeau, who's another wonderful actor, on the stage of politics, a bit like Alexander Ocasio-Vortex, as I call him.
He could just get his eyebrows to stay in place. You know?
Good one, Thumper. But it's just. I mean, it's unbelievable, really, because it's very interesting you say that. He started the World Wildlife Fund. We've seen Prince Charles go to Davos. Oh, my goodness. Go there and speak politically. It's supposed to be apolitical. And then we've had, you know, even Prince William make a comment of that. The problem is, because we have people swallowing various things, right hook, line, and sinker, they will not be aware of the agenda and what is actually being pushed. And what's being pushed, as we say constantly, is globalism. And one of the reasons why I'm wearing this shirt, which is a tribute to your country, because as I've said, if America falls, then the whole of Western civilization goes. And people turn around and go, well, what do you mean? You know, when they're having a go at being very, very anti-Trump. I am not a worshipper. I don't worship Donald Trump. God, you know, Jesus is my Lord. Donald Trump is your president. And I remember being at the rally in Cincinnati last summer, and a young lady had that T-shirt on that said, Jesus is my Lord, but Trump is my president, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. I must get that T-shirt. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that the president of the United States, the position has always been seen as leader of the free world. And what's happened is that things have slowly, well, in fact, massively unwound, where the curtain has pulled back, and all that we've seen the puppet masters. We've seen the puppet masters, and what has actually been going on. We've seen whether, you know, what in regard to McCain, etc., or various things that are going on. Visits, you know, we go to the Middle East and bump into a load of terrorists, and who are the CIA funding, and all this kind of thing. Now, Europe, I mean, William F. Jasper, his book Global Tyranny, wonderfully touches on this. Alex Newman's articles as well have wonderfully touched on this. When we go through European history, and this is not comfortable, it isn't comfortable for people to hear or to go through it. And I'm not being clever, it's because I'm reading other people's books. But in 1944, I believe in the Moulin Rouge Hotel, which would be in Paris, so it would be pre the Normandy landings, there was a meeting. There was a meeting of all the high-ranking Nazis saying, we're losing the war. The fact that they even had a meeting to say that, and the fact that they lived to tell the tale, they are losing the war. And they then the industrialists of IG Farben, as we touched on earlier, were then asked to come into the room and said, we are losing the war, Third Reich. It's now up to you to create the Fourth Reich. Mm-hmm. And this becomes very, very uncomfortable, because then we have the Nuremberg trials, and various Nazis are put on trial, who then were responsible for the disgusting things that went on in regard to the Holocaust and these camps. After that, a number of industrialists were then put on trial. And that is documented in books. And what I find fascinating is you both are agreeing with me. On your side of the pond, when I am over, when I'm speaking to other friends, I'm speaking to people where you understand all this. You understand that Wall Street financed the Bolshevik Revolution and financed, you know, Karl Marx going over there and all this kind of thing. If I said that over here, it'd be like, oh, no. Well, Karl Marx is worship as deity. You know,
many people here don't know it either, Mark. And you know, if they've been paying attention and listening, especially the last couple of years here at Patriot Soapbox, I guarantee you they know it.
Yeah.
But I go out and talk amongst friends. I had a friend who we passed away this past week, and we had a ceremony of, you know, a gathering celebrating his life yesterday. And a lot of people I hadn't seen for 2 years because I've been sitting here doing this.
Wow.
You know, we talked a lot, and hopefully they are watching right now because they did get a business card. But always marketing. You got to always market.
Yeah.
But no, it's surprising how many people still don't know about, you know, Operation Paperclip and, you know, IG Farben.
Yeah.
And all of the things that went on, and how they did create the Fourth Reich through Operation Paperclip, and it's alive and active right here in our borders.
Absolutely, and this is another very good book. So Annie Jacobsen, Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought Nazi scientists to America, right? And it's really, really important that I'm not just showing these books off to go, oh, look how clever I am. What I'm saying is it's really, really important because people have written great work. This is true. This is evidence by books Don't rely on the digital media. And of course, in regard to Europe, we have then there's another incredible books. Hold on, let's go. Nazi International, written by Joseph P. Farrell. Joseph P. Farrell then wrote The Third Way, right? The Nazi International European Union. Over here, there's been a magazine called The Third Way. Blair would say we create the third way. Am I calling Blair a Nazi? No, I'm just saying the ideology. Then, as a committed Christian, right? I just come back to that where Ephesians 6 talks about the fact that we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. This is how they remorph into all different things. And it's really interesting. It's brilliant, Thumper, that you raised Operation Paperclip, because my own understanding of that the first director general of NASA was Vernon von Braun, who was head of Hitler's rocketry. You can't make any of this up. And then when you see pictures of a V2 rocket being launched in America, and my own understanding of that, the only time that V2 rockets were used was flying over the channel to bomb London or other parts of the country. So how did that happen? How did they then get into your society? Of course, they were taken. But I was just going to say that the industrialists of IG Fairbairn were then put on trial at Nuremberg. And as other books have talked about, they then found themselves, some of them with sentences of 3 months, and then they were back working for companies within Germany. Now, here's the uncomfortable thing, and we start to read this. We start to go back to people like Jean Monnet, and there's been books in France and articles, and his family are very furious about this because he is one of the architects of the EU. And then it all is supposed to be, like deity and what a wonderful person and all this kind of thing. That's very interesting because Jean Monnet, during the Second World War, then found himself in Washington. Now,
and Mark, incidentally, Monet was also a confessed communist.
Yeah, and also it looks like he may have been had connections with the OSS, which was pre-CIA. And then we go into even more of an uncomfortable subject over the fact that I think General Patton was asked to denazify Europe. He did not do that. And then suddenly all these people some of these people that were on trial as industrialists in Nuremberg then went to work for German companies again, because it was a bulwark, as you know, because your friend and someone I've had the privilege to be on the radio with, which is Bill Jasper, talked about this in his book, talked about this in Global Tyranny. And this was written in 1992. So he says, so the Marshall Plan, the regeneration of Europe. And as he laid out, Monet, it wasn't Marshall's plan, it was Monet's plan. And Monet fed that to Marshall, right? So CIA links a bulwark against communism. There's those things going on. Then you have the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Bingo. And then what happened, and this is what is the disgusting thing that goes on, is the fact that all the poor Jewish people that were taken into the concentration camps and all their gold, etc., that was taken out of their mouths, etc., is then melted down into gold ingots of a certain size. It ends up finding itself in the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland, and then is then from there washed into the rest of the banking system, and then comes back and it ends up in German bank vaults, which actually pays for the next invasion of whatever country. Now, I can't think of his name, but there was a man linked with the Bank of England who was then involved as well. This is nefarious. This is evil. And the reason why then I am passionate about that, and we have to look into it, is that these are all the spiritual roots of Europe and what has gone on. And that's why it's an absolute, unbelievable, incredible miracle that we voted out and we voted to leave and we voted to take control of our country again. and to be in charge of our own borders, to be in charge of our own laws, to be in charge of our own money supply, and to be in charge of our own language.
Mark, I want you to address something while we've got you on the air, and that is the Islamization of England and of Europe, because that plays a large part in this as well, because open borders, a world in chaos without any borders, is a key to the New World Order. Talk about how England, and certainly around London especially, with your new mayor and all the things that are going on in England, talk about Islamization and how that fits into this puzzle.
Well, it does. Again, there's an incredible book by Bataillon called Eurabia Arab Axis. She touches on this, and you can find her stuff on YouTube. And again, this is uncomfortable to discuss, but it's the Barcelona Agreement. And the reason why I talked about what I was saying about France earlier in regard to his atheistic construct, Voltaire, etc., is the fact that then it would, it's like Morocco, etc., links there with other lands under its own particular empire. The Barcelona Agreement of 1995, but leading up to that in the early 70s, and you can remember, as I do, various planes taking hostages and all this kind of thing, right? Within Europe was a push for anti-Americanism, to be, believe it or not, which is ridiculous, which is an insult to your great nation, because I seem to understand that in the First World War, you came over and helped, and in the Second World War, you helped also big time, majorly. And just a reminder, on the Normandy landings, I think in one day, 10,000 American soldiers were injured or killed. There were 10,000 casualties in one day. So the recent insult, when quite rightly President Trump comes over to pay honor and homage to that, and the way that we handled that in regard to Corbyn and the Mayor of London was just disgusting. So I offer an apology to American people on behalf of myself to that, because I was quite disgusted by that behaviour. So how does it fit in? It has to fit in from understanding history. And this is not discussed. The history says of France, Europe beginning to turn to be push an anti-American bias, and to look towards the Arab countries, to look towards and to shut eyes to certain things, to look towards the Arab countries, because it would then be access to oil and all this kind of thing. And it's about building relationships up. And what you had at the Barcelona conference was a meeting where people were discussing the fact that they were saying, well, Islam has done this for the European culture, Islam has done that for the European culture. Not discussing the fact that under jihadist acts, Islam then spread. And we look in the Mediterranean basin of what was going on is for quite a few hundred years, there would be and of course, Islam then went all the way up to northern Spain and was then pushed back from a small kingdom there that needs to be recognized as well. If we look in where the book of Revelations in the Bible talks about the 7 letters to the churches, they are all those places in Asia Minor and now in Turkey. My own understanding of that is Islam. It was a fairly liberal country in that regard, but Erdogan has other ideas because he wishes to build the history of it is the Ottoman Empire all over again. Yeah. So that's where that is. People need to remember that. So let's give another important bit of history before we quickly say where it's at now. So your navy was created round about, 1808 because of the Barbary Wars. your Navy, the Marines, on the road to Tripoli, right? That's where that's where the song comes from.
It's where the term leatherneck comes from,
Precisely.
too.
Absolutely. And that, well said, Thumper, because that, again, is not understood. So you had leather collars to stop the scimitars chopping your heads off. That history is not discussed in history books over here. And it was a definitive decision at the Barcelona Declaration of 1995 within that discussion to make sure that Islamic prowess and all the rest was pushed through into academic textbooks. There's a comment that's made about in regard to agriculture. And my own understanding of it in this particular book is that Mohammed was not really into agriculture and made a comment about not bringing those implements into people's houses and all this. And then it said that Islam, did a fantastic contribution in regard to agriculture and all the rest. Well, actually, it was because of what they then took off Christians and Jews and what they learned from them. Say how history is being rewritten. It is shocking. It's not discussed. It is shocking, but they are looking to turn it into Eurabia. There seems to be this deliberate policy. There was a change also tied in with that in regard to anti-Americanism, moving away from that and turning to, say, the Middle East, but not then shutting its eyes to the disgusting things that would go on in those countries and how it treated its people and all the rest.
Right. And you hear the so-called progressives, the liberals, the French talk about how important it is to respect people's rights and how important it is to recognize feminism and homosexuality and all this other stuff, but yet that flies in exact opposition to what Islam is all about. And yet you're allowing, in London, you're allowing Sharia law in London, in your court system. How is that working for you?
Well, on one level, I can't comment, but on the other hand, I will comment. Yes, there is Sharia law courts in this country. And so what we've now got, right, and I'm going to just distinguish here. There are many Muslims that do not follow the tenets of their faith. They don't. Now, on the other hand, if the wind blew in a particular direction, then maybe they would start following the tenets of that. And I have a major problem with people that are following the full tenets of Islam, because you're absolutely right. There is no integration. There is no acceptance of the British way of life, laws, etc. There is none of that. This is, if we say biblically, this is a total and utter push to undo, right? The Bible is very, very clear in regard to demarcation lines of countries. Borders is being defined by that. And, Nimrod tried to do that and attack God. Turns round to the people, divides all different languages, and then there's nations and that for a reason. And the nation of Israel is there for a reason. And to me, you get rid of borders, you get rid of countries, you can then turn around and say, now we're going to wipe out the nation of Israel, right? That's another debate. So this whole thing, so multiculturalism is reversing to me what God did in regard to Nimrod back then. And for poor people turn around and say it's a fable, no. It's not a fable in my own particular beliefs. So multiculturalism is trying to undo all that and undo nation states and create this transitory immigration on the move. Okay, when people have signed the Global Migration Compact, and people are going, yes, but isn't it awful what these people are suffering? Yeah, in many ways, of course, it is awful what certain people are suffering. But when we look at why Syria is being bombed, why we look at it in regard to Iraq, why we look into Afghanistan, why you are deliberately stirring all this up, why we go into Libya, we came, he saw, he died, ha ha ha, says Hillary. and you cause utter chaos in that country that you didn't have to. Whatever you thought of Gaddafi, and Lockerbie is a very sore thing. And I knew 2 people that actually died on that plane. And very, very sore thing of what happened. Now, he always said, Gaddafi said, you get rid of me, you will have many, many people crossing the Mediterranean. And what's happened is that we have got these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, weaponized, where boats are leaving Libya, going out so far, then distress signals are going out, then linking up with other boats to then pick them up, to then take them across the Mediterranean into Europe. That's why Italy, the Italian government, started shutting this down and getting very, very annoyed. And the Greek government are certain people in Greece are rather unhappy about this as well. Now, this is, of course, undermining the Judeo-Christian culture and history of the nation of Europe, and of course we throw in the fact that my enemy's enemy is my friend, and that's what the left then say. So Islam, if people are following Islam, which is a political ideology, Sharia law and all this is not compatible at all.
It's a theocracy, and with a theocracy, it's interesting that communism, the Soviet Union, was the one that trained many of the terrorists that ended up doing a lot of the things that we ended up going in and fighting. And you're right. I mean, if someone were to come to the United States and start bombing us and start doing some of the things that we see happening by the political class to stir up turmoil, we'd be fighting back too. And literally, we have created really our own enemies, our own systems of enemies.
Well, it's called
it's globalism. It's all part of globalism,
and it's the military industrial complex. And I just want to say this publicly. Your brave men and women that have gone off to fought various wars, they're not party to those decisions. They have joined up, believing what they are there to defend their nation. They believe that, and they are to be honored and respected for the sacrifice that they have made. And I just want to say that. I want to distinguish between that and the fact that Donald Rumsfeld says on the night before 9/11, there's a massive hole in the Pentagon budget. And then suddenly, I'm just going to say this, people can go down the rabbit warren, but suddenly a missile or an object or a plane missile goes into those offices. What was all that about? Where's the 2.1 trillion deficit in the Pentagon budget at that time?
Right. And it just evaporated, Mark.
Yes.
With 9/11, it just evaporated.
Yeah.
And guess what? A lot of our liberties did too, because within a matter of days, we were talking about the Patriot Act,
which had been drawn up a number of years before,
under the Clinton administration.
Absolutely, and then we have to have the new American, the project of the new American century, and I believe on page 55 we have to have our own Pearl Harbor. I leave people to work that out and to think and to think on that. I do not mean to be disrespectful for anyone who died there, because it was absolutely awful.
No.
It is called connecting the dots.
Yes.
On the show. So just connect the dots.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Thumper, because in the end, and then suddenly we go off to carpet bomb Afghanistan, and then we go into Iraq, and then all this chaos is then ensured. And the fact that Dick Cheney seems to have a map where various oil fields are, and then he turns around and says, well, it was great. No one knew I was a member of, I think, the Trilateral Commission or the Council of Foreign Relations.
CFR,
the CFR. And then he said, people in Wisconsin never knew, and they're thinking it's funny. This is not funny.
And everybody in America had to get stretchy pants and slippers in order to fly on airplanes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I, having been through a number of your airports a few months ago on a number of flights, the fact that, we're going into these X-ray machines, the fact that your constitutional rights are being undermined, et cetera, et cetera. So all this patriarch, all of this is in place. And that's why, you refer it to Islam coming into Europe and undermining all of that. This is like as a globalist tool. Now, to even discuss it is really, really interesting to discuss this, because we have to discuss this, because then they go on about the fact that, the Crusades, what did the Crusades do? I don't know. Was it up to 5, 6, 7, maybe Crusades? The fact that the pilgrim roads to Jerusalem had been shut down, and there were many, many jihadist acts for quite a few hundred years. I mean, Bill Warner on your side of the pond is the wonderful expert on this, where he has a map and all these dots suddenly appear of all these jihadist acts, and people can't quite believe it. They can't work it out. And it's history that is not talked about. That's why I talked about the Barbary Wars and the fact that you create your Marines at that time. And the then president says to the jihadists and the Muslims attacking and going, well, why are you attacking us? We're a new nation. Well, it says in our Quran this. So that's why they went and got one and read it. So we have to talk from a position. We have to talk from a position of history, Dan. We have to talk from a position of knowledge and say, and Thumper said it, leathernecks. And people go, excuse me, what do you mean? Well, there is this. I've got another interesting book here on that. This is what was going on. We talk about history. So when suddenly we as a nation are the nation of Emily Pankhurst, pushing forward women being able to vote, et cetera, all of these things are under that particular theocracy, under that that ideology, are then not allowed. It would mean that anyone who was gay would be thrown off a roof. That's how these people treat people. No. Whatever I may think of that particular lifestyle, you do not treat people like that. So all this going on.
Mark, and we've got to make that connection back, that connection between communism and what has become radical Islam, because they call them strange bedfellows. They're not strange bedfellows. No. They work very well together because, frankly, the communists want to get rid of Christianity.
Yes.
And so does Islam. It works very well. Yeah. And they believe that they can wipe out Islam after they've finished off the Christian world. They just see it that way.
Absolutely. And, as well as I do, if we look in the book of Acts and we look, persecute Christians, the Christian church grows under persecution. And it's not something that on the one level, on a personal level, I want, but I could actually say that actually the persecution is already here. The persecution is already here in regard to free speech. The persecution is already here in people thinking that their Christian faith, it's all going to be comfortable and isn't it all nice? Actually, they're being sold a lie because people have not been talked about persecution and the sacrifice and martyrdom. We have to look at I've just had a very interesting conversation with a dear friend of mine, very close friend of mine from Nigeria, who's just been out to Nigeria to look at what's been happening in Biafra and etc. in his part of the world, and all these herdsmen and Boko Haram killing Christians and killing Christian leaders. This is all deliberate. That comes back to something very interesting in regard to Nigeria. And according to him, and he's very well connected, when Obama actually asked the previous leader, Johnson, I think, I'm just trying to think of his name, to actually step down. And then this election happened, and then you put a Muslim leader in. I mean, this guy seems to object to political interference in his own country, but seems to have been up to it in regard to Nigeria, in regard to Kenya, and in regard to Israel. So you're right. This whole bedfellows, and it'd be interesting to see what you guys think or anyone else say in the chat, because what frustrates me is that we can talk about all these things until we're absolutely blue, red, whatever in the face, and people still don't get it. They still don't want to get it. They still want to go about their business going, la, 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 it's not going to affect me. Everything's fine. Well, it is going to affect you. It's affecting you now. And whatever people think of this, the fact is that if President Trump does not win in 2020, then your nation is in very, very serious trouble. And I don't see why he shouldn't win at all.
But they can cheat. They can cheat.
They do. They do.
In the past.
Yeah, they do.
And the thing, Mark, that we need to realize, and I'm glad you're talking about this, you really want Americans to wake up and understand that all the stuff that's going on in the swamp in America is we are the last best hope for the world. If we lose our constitutional republic, we will fall into, as Ronald Reagan said, 1,000 years of darkness. And that's not a hyperbola. That's the truth.
No, that is the truth. And he, the fact that he had Senior Bush with what we now as his vice president and various things that got up to there is another thing. Absolutely. And he was the last before this particular president, in my opinion, who understood the Constitution and all the rest of, as just someone that people just thought they really wanted the best for America. Yes, you're right. I if someone could find the money and fly me around America, and then we could have some interesting meetings, that is what I would then be screaming at people. Screaming at them, just saying, wake up, wake up. This is what your Constitution is about. This is why it happened. I mean, your dear friend Trevor Loudon, that's why Trevor wrote his book, The Enemies Within. That's why Trevor's making that film, Enemies Within the Church, which just says so much to me, because we have that all over here. We have this total invasion of liberal progressive Marxism within the church. I mean, the British Council of Churches was incorporated in regard to over the whole joining the EU in 1973, etc., and saying that it's a good idea and all this kind of thing. The fact that we have got interfaith dialogue all the time, and that has been pushed more and more since the Barcelona Agreement of 1995. I'm entitled to my opinion, and I'm entitled to talk about history and come up with facts, but people don't like that. And then it's a case of, you're being Islamophobic and you're being a bigot. And no, we either believe, as a Christian, I either believe that Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. That's it. There is only one way to God. That's it. And of course, that doesn't go down very well. And the reason why I am screaming, America, please wake up, is that the liberal progressives, the whole communist socialist construct does not believe in God, does not believe in man's individual relationships with his creator. It's also deeply, utterly frightened by it, because at the end of the day, as a true believer, that cannot be taken away. And when they're asking people to swear allegiance to the progressive system, and we're all in this together, then they don't like that one iota.
Well, Mark, you touched on something that's important. Our Constitution is based on what's called natural law, and that is God's law. It's based on nature and nature's God, and it was said that way because, in fact, most of the founders were Christian men. Most of them were Protestants from a Calvinist background, so they understood, the role of God and the Ten Commandments and Jesus Christ in the Constitution. They created something called unalienable rights, and that is the proper definition or pronunciation. Unalienable rights, and those rights could not be taken away by government. Well, that's the exact opposite. That's the antithesis of what we were talking about with the French Revolution.
Yeah,
the French Revolution was based on the idea that government controls man.
Absolutely.
And the American experience is that man controls government, but God controls man. And he creates freedom for us. So, okay. I'm going to let you talk away.
But Dan, it's so important that what you've said. It's so important what you've said, because over here in Europe, we don't understand that. We are looking, you see, let's just say that, throw this out. It's like I come over to the States, many friends own guns. You know, there are mutual friends that we won't name that, you know, we own guns. That's it. There's a gun by the door, right? And we don't understand that. We have to look at the fact that in the 20th century, under democide, Hitler took all the guns away. Mao took all the guns away. You know, this is deliberate. This is what Stalin did, exactly that. At one point, you know, Stalin's maybe a week, you know, murdering 40,000 of his own countrymen. This is real. People were not in a position to then defend themselves.
Right.
So we don't understand. We don't understand why you have a Second Amendment. Well, you have a Second Amendment to defend the First Amendment, and the fact that you have a Second Amendment because there was a warning in the Founding Fathers of tyranny, of a tyrannical government, of a government that is out of control. And what's happened is that it's been revealed. The swamp has been revealed, where the Clinton Foundation, you know, Strzok, Comey, Hannigan, Brennan, you know, the whole lot of Rice, etc., the whole lot of them have been exposed, who are part of this whole cabal and a whole cover-up, because they passionately do not believe in your constitution whatsoever. So when 22,000 plus people go to Virginia to protest about the fact that they wish to undermine your Second Amendment rights, and there's 22,000 people taking their weapons, there's not one shot and not one arrest in regard to that whatsoever. It's a peaceable protest, and it's not the guns, it's the people that are baddies that have them. That's why these awful things are going on in Chicago on a regular basis every weekend. So we
with
don't
the toughest gun control laws in the entire universe.
Precisely. And we don't understand this. We think you're raving mad. People think you're raving mad. There's all these school shootings and all the rest. No, not as many people as the shootings as people think. There are other things going on in other countries. I mean, when it goes to Thumper and it's showing his picture, you know, on the shooting range, etc., etc., you have those weapons for a reason, and the reason why you have, as the Japanese general said in the Second World War, you know, the last thing we can do is invade America, because behind every blade of grass is an American with a gun.
Or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5.
Or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but absolutely. But the thing is, it's 2, 3, 4 or 5. But the sad thing is that your constitution has not been taught in your civics lessons properly, you know, for 25, 30 years at times, and people not having an understanding of that, why there is an allegiance to the flag, to the country, why it actually came about. And that's why I'm then passionate about it. That's why I made Between Lambs and Lions and all the rest. And just watching history unfold. You are the biggest experiment in people government. We don't understand that. We don't understand that over here. So you could turn around and say that in 1875, I think, is when men in this country were given the vote. People think that we are the bastion of democracy for hundreds of years. Not necessarily whatsoever. And of course, we have common law in regard to we don't have a constitution like you, but we have common law where commonality, common decisions have created. Common sense has come to say, well, this is how we're going to rule in this particular way. That's why, Dan, it comes back to it. And Thumper, this whole thing of joining the European Union, then we have European law. But look at where it comes from. It does not come from a godly perspective. And we are the nation with our faults, but empire took Christianity around the world, right? We had a little ruckus and a fracas with you in 1776, which understandably you won, because
you also had one with South Africa around 1900, and got a pretty good bloody nose off that one too.
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely, and this whole thing of freedom, and people not understanding that, and not understanding what was going on and how it's been played. And we look at South Africa and the fact that it is, the politics of it are just downright communist. And
well, they are. They turned the country over to the communists, and guess who was behind that? Jimmy Carter started it, and Bush didn't stand up for him. Reagan did, but Bush didn't stand up for the South Africans. And guess what? Look at the mess they're in now. And it isn't better for blacks in South Africa. It's much worse, because now they have communism, where at least before they had a semblance of free markets.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
I have a question from the chat for you, from Mr. Dynamix out here. He's asking, he says, ask Mark if usury is half the problems in the world.
in regards to banking and lending, well, I would say that the fractional reserve lending and the Federal Reserve, yes, in the fact that your taxation system and how that came about is rather interesting. And the fact that I believe that, of course, you didn't have a personal taxation until 1913, and I believe that you would make money by trading over state lines and tariff barriers. That's why we joined the European Union, because we could trade. We thought we were trading with different countries with having low tariff barriers. Usury, yes, and then we could discuss in the Old Testament and the year of Jubilee and reversing the land back and all this kind of thing. Getting people into debt. There's no need for a load of that. Yeah.
That's how you control people, Mark.
Precisely.
Get them into debt.
The debt. You're absolutely right. I don't know whether I've answered Mr. Dynamic's question, but there's a huge element. I'll tell you what, actually, we can answer it like this. We can answer absolutely bang on. So if we look at what's happened in Africa, we look at the International Monetary Fund, we look at the loans in the early to mid 70s that has got a load of these countries into debt. If we look at the fact that there may be something like 948 billion of whatever currency that is offshore in various offshore accounts that should be going back to African countries, but they are siphoned off by various dictators. I'm trying to think of, there's a particular film, something Spider, that talks about all this, which is an excellent documentary that was made in 2018. Maybe Purple Spider or something, that talks about this. So the usury, we in the West, how we're getting these people into debt through the International Monetary Fund and all this kind of thing. Absolutely right. That had a big contribution in regard to bailing us out, and then maybe even now I suddenly look on it, even getting us into Europe and staying and keeping us in Europe, Dan.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, I want to give you a chance, because we've only got about 10 minutes left, and it always works that way. When we get a dialogue going, it's just a lot of fun. We could go for hours and hours. I want you to talk about what you see happening after the January 31st and Britain and the UK getting out of the EU. Let's talk about where it's going to go.
Well, first of all, by the end of the year, we have until December to negotiate a trade agreement with the EU. What is really, really good is that already President Trump and America is already saying, well, we want to negotiate a good trade deal with you. There is no doubt about it that behind the scenes, trade deal negotiations around the world are happening. How do I see where it's going? What we need to do is to find our entrepreneurial spirit again. We've had it. We've had the Industrial Revolution. We need to find that again. The government, I think, through various conversations, is really, really wanting to push that. A number of companies who are in Europe have asked to seek stay here, have access to our markets and everything else. They've been applying for various licenses or the legality of that. So when various Remainers have gone on about Project Fear, you know, if we leave the EU, the whole of the Thames would turn red and the sky would fall. That is not going to happen. I do not believe that's going to happen. My own understanding of this is that we are the second biggest net contributor to the European Union. It's them that needs to be worried. Do people think that we're not going to still import various things from France? We're not going to import cars from Germany and all this sort of thing? Yes, of course, we will be, but we will be exporting as well. But we, I think, do 15% of our gross of our sort of trade is with Europe. The rest, it's within this cartel. It's shrunk down to 15% of the world's trade. So we will start to look out. Let's just quickly explain this, Dan, because we've touched on this before. If you are part of the European Union, you're part of the 27 countries, part of that. One person goes and negotiates trade deals on behalf of all the other 26 members of the European Union.
All right.
So when you look at your traditional Betty Ross flag, which is where the European Union flag was stolen from, because it's about the United States of Europe, that's the play on that. Mm-hmm. It goes and negotiates on behalf of the whole of Europe trade deals. We now, as a nation, will be able to go and negotiate on part of ourselves. We can sit at, well, it's going to be interesting, isn't it? The G7, the G8, the G whatever, the G20, the G whatever. We will be there ourselves, banging the drum for our own nation. We will not be under any EU prerogative along that line. They are absolutely scared, without using another word, over the fact that we are going, because they will not have access to the money that we pay in. And we have been paying in to some £18 billion a year, and then we get a certain rebates back. It's partly its attitude. Whether we've got this long time, I don't know. But the fact is that we entered the European Union in 1973. We have not been running our own country. We are going to learn how to run our own country again, and that's what we need to do as fast as possible. And there's another interesting clean out going, and this is reflecting on for you guys on your side of the pond. We need to see a whole examination, root and branch of our civil service. And our civil service a lot of them are Remainers. A lot of them have been working against us leaving. We need to clear that out. We need to remember who we are as a nation. And it has to be said that the reason why we started turning towards Europe, and again, it's this, Ted Heath, Monet was very good friends with Ted Heath, who took us into the EU. He was his mentor. What a surprise. And we could say that under the Suez Crisis of 1955 is when we lost our nerve, and it's because we didn't say to your president then, we're going to go and do this action. And America got rather annoyed with us, and then the rest is history. And we lost our nerve as a nation in regard to seeing the empire starting to fall apart from 1948. So going back, I think it's down to individuals. I think it's people realizing that they've realized that actually Westminster has not had the power that they were told that they had. They've been conned since 1973, but people have always known this. So what's going to happen? It's going to be the fact that we need to talk ourselves up. We need to say that we've got many, many things that we can do as a nation, and we need to just go for it to the best of our ability. We are going to negotiate a fantastic deal, I'm sure, with you, with the writer of The Art of the Deal. So That's all I can say.
All right, Mark, I have to tell you, first of all, what you're talking about is the rights of the individual, individualism versus collectivism.
Precisely.
The EU represents collectivism.
Yeah.
And Brexit really represents individualism.
That's right.
What's in your self-interest. And boy, howdy, does that sound an awful lot like what Trump has been talking about?
I actually have a question in the chat that kind of adds on that, if I can. Will Great Britain go further and adopt a constitutional republic?
Wow, what a question. Whoever's asked that, thank you very much. I don't know. What is up for grabs? We have two chambers, as you know. You have the members of Parliament in Westminster, and you also have the House of Lords. What is up to grabs is a root and branch look at the House of Lords and actually maybe changing it, because the House of Lords has been packed full of Remainers for many, many years. Having a constitution, that's something that maybe as a nation we might look at, even though we do have canon law, we do have, common law. There is actually, you say under Magna Carta from Charles I, you could actually say that technically there is a constitution. That would be really, really interesting. I don't know, because I mean your system on the one hand is very, very different. But on the other hand, it's not. I think the key thing, the big debate, actually, to answer this, the big debate that's come up, and this begins the discussion, is the fact that members of Parliament, are they there to represent the people that have voted to send them there, or are they there to represent what they think is best for the people? And they are two different things.
Totally different things. And I have to, Thumper, I want to say that with the idea of individualism, the rights of the individual to make decisions for themselves is exactly what our constitutional republic was meant to be. And democracy was always meant to be limited, because limited democracy really led us to be a republic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you use democracy to people to allow that to vote. Yeah, very sparing.
And what is leading some of the people to ask about that is because we've seen a little bit of shakeup in the monarchy.
Yeah,
Harry resigning, and
well, they're all a bunch of liberal, progressive socialists in their thinking, and Meghan and all that. Highly dangerous. They can just go to Canada and get on with that. Yes, there is a big shake-up. But that's not a bad thing. I was just going to say, can I just say that because I need to try to rebuild my website, and I've had a few issues with that. If people wanted to reach me, then please reach out to me on. You can get me on my email, which is marksutherland26@gmail.com. And Thumper, if you could either put that somewhere, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay. Mark Sutherland, all one word.
Yeah, 26@gmail.com. That would be amazing. So thank you.
And Mark, I want to give you a chance to talk about what you're doing right now and how people can support what you're doing, the films, the things that you're doing. Very quickly, give us a little bit of a overview.
Right. Well, we haven't shown it, which doesn't matter on the one hand, but there is a faith-based Christian film that I'm frantically trying to help get off the ground in Tennessee on your side of the pond, which is a CGI sort of fest. And it is, there's an important Christian message in there. So trying to work on that. And that's called Orbiter, the movie. And if anyone wants to contact me about that, then please do, because it does need funding. If someone had a spare $250,000, then problems would be solved instantly. And there's a film out there that already has distribution access to a cinema chain that could really spread across your nation.
Well, so if every one of our subscribers sends you $1, we could do that.
Oh, well, that'd be amazing. That'd be amazing. Yeah. That'd be fantastic. And then they give another $1 to you. But yeah, no, that'd be great. So I'm up to that. Between Lambs and Lions, yeah, we'd love to turn that into a feature film. There is a huge project that a treatment's gone out to producer friends in California, which would be really good because it is a Second World War drama. So there's a number of things like that. And Dan, I need to write a book. I need to get stuff out there in regard to the last few years of my own reflection on what's been going on this side of the pond and your side of the pond. But there just doesn't seem enough time right now. So if anyone's got any spare prayer time, then I would appreciate that as well. But I just want to say this, I'm very, very grateful to these links and what I have. And I need to step up and start broadcasting more where I can interview people like you and Thumper and stuff like that and do that. So I need to get my head around that in regard to the technology as well.
Well, let's make sure that we make that happen, Mark. And you're certainly welcome to come back. I look forward to another opportunity to visit with you. I want to thank you for being our guest. Patrick Howley is on, ready to start his radio program. So I have to sign off for connecting the dots and turn it over to Patrick. But again, Mark, it's always a pleasure. And I will see if I can find those folks that might want to help you with your films.
That'd be amazing. And God bless. And thank you very much for having me on. It's been an absolute honor, and it's lovely to see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Patriot Soapbox, Mark.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic. We're losing our freedom in the land.